Welcome to episode 7 of Workplace English Masterclass. Have you ever needed to tell a colleague that something could be improved, but you weren't sure how to say it? Or perhaps you've received feedback and felt uncomfortable or defensive? If so, you're not alone. Giving and receiving feedback can be challenging, especially in professional environments where relationships and communication matter. However, feedback is one of the most valuable tools for growth and improvement. When delivered effectively, feedback helps people learn, develop new skills, improve performance, and achieve better results. In today's lesson, you'll learn how to give feedback professionally, how to receive feedback positively, and how to communicate suggestions in a way that encourages improvement rather than creating conflict. By the end of this lesson, you'll feel more confident handling feedback conversations in the workplace. Let's get started. Before we learn the phrases, let's understand why feedback is so important. The first benefit is improving performance. Feedback helps people identify their strengths and areas for improvement. Without feedback, it can be difficult to know what is working well and what needs attention. The second benefit is encouraging growth. Constructive feedback helps individuals develop new skills and become more effective in their roles. Professional growth often begins with honest and helpful feedback. The third benefit is building trust. When feedback is delivered respectfully and professionally, it demonstrates that people care about each other's success. This helps strengthen workplace relationships. The fourth benefit is solving problems. Many workplace issues can be addressed more effectively when people communicate openly and provide constructive suggestions. The final benefit is strengthening teamwork. Teams perform better when members are comfortable sharing ideas, offering suggestions, and helping one another improve. For these reasons, feedback is an essential part of professional communication and workplace success. Let's begin with phrases for starting feedback positively. The first phrase is, "I'd like to share some feedback." This phrase prepares the other person for the conversation in a respectful and professional way. For example, "I'd like to share some feedback regarding yesterday's presentation." This creates a clear and professional introduction. The second phrase is, "You've done a great job with." This phrase highlights something positive before discussing improvements. For example, "You've done a great job with the project planning and organization." Recognizing strengths helps create a balanced feedback conversation. The third phrase is, "I appreciate your efforts." This phrase acknowledges the time, energy, and commitment someone has invested in their work. For example, "I appreciate your efforts in preparing the report." People are generally more receptive to feedback when they feel their contributions are recognized. The final phrase is, "Thank you for your contribution." This phrase demonstrates appreciation and respect. For example, "Thank you for your contribution to the team's success this month." Starting feedback positively helps create a supportive atmosphere and makes it easier to discuss areas for improvement constructively. Now let's explore how to give constructive feedback. Constructive feedback focuses on helping someone improve rather than simply pointing out mistakes. The first phrase is, "One area for improvement is." This phrase introduces feedback in a professional and supportive way. For example, "One area for improvement is time management during presentations." Notice that the phrase focuses on improvement rather than criticism. The second phrase is, "You may want to consider." This phrase sounds like a suggestion rather than an instruction. For example, "You may want to consider adding more examples to support your ideas." Suggestions are often easier for people to accept than direct criticism. The third phrase is, "It might be helpful to." This phrase encourages improvement while maintaining a positive tone. For example, "It might be helpful to prepare an agenda before the meeting." This focuses on solutions rather than problems. The final phrase is, "Have you thought about?" This phrase encourages reflection and discussion. For example, "Have you thought about using visuals to make the presentation more engaging?" Constructive feedback should guide people towards improvement while preserving their confidence and motivation. One of the most important principles of effective feedback is being specific. Let's look at an example. Imagine someone says, "Your presentation wasn't good." While this statement expresses dissatisfaction, it doesn't explain what the problem was or how to improve. As a result, the person receiving the feedback may feel discouraged or confused. Now let's look at a better example. The presentation was clear, but adding more examples could make it even stronger. Notice the difference. The feedback begins with something positive. The speaker acknowledges a strength by saying that the presentation was clear. They then provide a specific suggestion for improvement, adding more examples. This gives the person clear guidance on what they can do differently next time. Specific feedback is much more useful than vague feedback because it helps people understand exactly what they are doing well and what they can improve. Whenever possible, focus on observable actions and specific behaviors rather than general opinions. The language we use when giving feedback can significantly affect how our message is received. Let's look at some phrases that should be avoided and better alternatives that sound more professional. The first phrase to avoid is, "You're always late." This sounds personal and accusatory. It may cause the other person to become defensive. A better approach is, "I've noticed that you've arrived late to several meetings recently." This focuses on a specific observation rather than making a personal judgment. The second phrase to avoid is, "You never listen." Again, this sounds like criticism of the person rather than feedback about behavior. Instead, you could say, "Perhaps we could spend more time discussing everyone's ideas before making a decision." This keeps the conversation constructive. The third phrase to avoid is, "That's wrong." While you may disagree, this phrase can sound harsh and dismissive. Instead, try, "Another approach might be." This encourages discussion and problem solving. Professional feedback focuses on behavior, actions, and solutions, rather than blame. Small changes in language can make a significant difference in how feedback is received. Giving feedback is important, but receiving feedback professionally is equally important. Many people become defensive when they receive feedback. However, successful professionals view feedback as an opportunity to learn and improve. Let's look at some useful phrases. The first phrase is, "Thank you for your feedback." This phrase shows professionalism and appreciation. For example, "Thank you for your feedback. I'll review those points." Even if you don't completely agree, it's important to acknowledge the person's effort in providing feedback. The second phrase is, "I appreciate your input." This phrase demonstrates openness and maturity. For example, "I appreciate your input. It's helpful to hear another perspective." That's helpful to know. This phrase shows that you value the information being shared. For example, "That's helpful to know. I'll pay more attention to that in future presentations." The final phrase is, "I'll work on that." This phrase demonstrates accountability and a willingness to improve. For example, "I'll work on that and make sure it's addressed moving forward." Receiving feedback professionally helps build trust, strengthen relationships, and support personal growth. Let's examine our first workplace scenario. A manager says, "You've done a great job on this project." Notice that the manager begins with positive feedback. Recognizing strengths helps create a balanced and supportive conversation. The manager then continues. "One area for improvement is time management." This is an example of constructive feedback. The manager is not attacking the employee personally. Instead, they are identifying a specific area that could be improved. The employee responds, "Thank you for the feedback." This response demonstrates professionalism and maturity. Rather than becoming defensive, the employee listens and acknowledges the feedback respectfully. This creates a positive conversation focused on growth and improvement. The best feedback conversations are not about criticism. They are about helping people become more effective and successful in their roles. Let's look at another workplace scenario. A colleague asks, Have you thought about adding more examples? Notice how this feedback is presented. The colleague is not saying, "Your presentation is boring." Instead, they offer a suggestion for improvement. The phrase, "Have you thought about," sounds collaborative and supportive. It encourages discussion rather than criticism. The employee responds, "That's a great suggestion." This is an excellent example of receiving feedback professionally. The employee recognizes the value of the idea and remains open to improvement. In professional environments, feedback should be viewed as an opportunity to learn rather than a personal attack. People who can give feedback constructively and receive feedback positively often build stronger workplace relationships and develop more quickly in their careers. Let's now look at some common mistakes people make when giving feedback. The first mistake is being too vague. For example, saying, "Good job," or "You need to improve," doesn't provide enough information. The person receiving the feedback may not understand exactly what they did well or what needs improvement. Effective feedback should be specific and actionable. The second mistake is being overly critical. Sometimes people focus only on mistakes and overlook strengths. This can damage confidence and make feedback difficult to accept. Professional communicators aim to provide balanced feedback by recognizing strengths while discussing areas for improvement. The third mistake is focusing on the person rather than the behavior. For example, "You're disorganized," focuses on the individual. A better approach would be, "The project files were difficult to locate during the meeting." This focuses on the behavior or situation instead. Now let's look at the positive alternatives. Being specific helps people understand exactly what they can improve. Focusing on behavior rather than personality keeps discussions professional. Offering solutions helps people move forward and make meaningful improvements. The goal of feedback is not to criticize. The goal is to help people grow and succeed. Now it's your turn to practice. Speaking practice helps transform knowledge into real communication skills. Let's work through these sentence starters together. The first sentence is, "I'd like to share some feedback." Think about a situation where you want to offer a suggestion professionally. For example, "I'd like to share some feedback regarding yesterday's presentation." The second sentence is, "One area for improvement is," remember that effective feedback focuses on specific behaviors and actions. For example, one area for improvement is providing more detailed explanations during client meetings. Thank you for your feedback. This phrase demonstrates professionalism when receiving feedback. For example, "Thank you for your feedback. I'll take that into consideration." The final sentence is, "I'll work on that." This phrase shows accountability and a willingness to improve. For example, "I'll work on that and make sure I apply it in future projects." Try completing each sentence using examples from your own workplace, studies, or daily experiences. The more you practice these phrases, the more confident you'll become when giving and receiving feedback professionally. Congratulations on completing Episode 7 of Workplace English Masterclass. Today, you've learned how to give feedback professionally, receive feedback positively, and communicate suggestions in a constructive and respectful manner. Let's briefly review what we've covered. You learned how to start feedback conversations positively. You learned how to provide constructive suggestions for improvement. You learned the importance of being specific when giving feedback. You learned how to avoid negative and overly critical language. You learned how to receive feedback professionally and use it as an opportunity for growth. And finally, you explored common mistakes that can reduce the effectiveness of feedback conversations. Remember, effective feedback is not about criticism. It's about helping people improve, develop, and succeed. The most successful professionals understand that feedback is one of the most powerful tools for learning and continuous improvement. As you continue developing your workplace communication skills, try using some of today's phrases during workplace discussions, meetings, and feedback conversations. With practice, these expressions will become natural and help you communicate with greater confidence and professionalism. In Episode 8, we'll learn how to present ideas with confidence and communicate persuasively in professional settings. thank you for learning with everyday English treats. I'll see you in the next lesson.